Do you ever feel like something is wrong? Like there is an invisible force quietly dictating your steps, narrowing your choices, limiting what you can demand and what you can refuse? Not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense, no shadowy figures in dark rooms. Something more ordinary than that, more structural, more difficult to see precisely because it is hiding in plain sight. The promise of this video is straightforward. There is a move being played, a strategy already in motion, and the prison it creates has no visible bars, but its chains are forged from something far more subtle and far more dangerous than physical force. They are forged from your own ignorance. Today, on Logos and Law, we are going to examine how the single most powerful tool of control in any society is not violence, not surveillance, not even propaganda. It is the careful, systematic maintenance of a population that does not know its own rights. And we are going to ask the question that most people never think to ask. Is that ignorance an accident? Or is it a feature?
Let's start with the uncomfortable truth at the center of all of this. Most people are far more vulnerable than they realize, not because they lack intelligence, not because they are weak, but because they do not know what they are entitled to. They do not know where the power of the state ends and where their rights begin. They do not know what can legally be demanded of them, what cannot, what they can refuse, what they can challenge, what protections exist that nobody ever told them about. And here is the critical point. You cannot exercise a right you do not know you have. The right exists on paper. It may be enshrined in a constitution, protected by law, affirmed by courts. But if the person who holds that right has no idea it exists, the practical effect is identical to having no right at all. The law says one thing, reality delivers another, and the gap between them is filled entirely by ignorance. This is the first move, not the confiscation of rights, the concealment of them. Because confiscation creates resistance. People fight back when something is visibly taken from them. But if you never knew you had it, there is nothing to fight for. The control is total, and it is achieved without a single act of force.
The second move is more sophisticated, because ignorance in this context is not simply passive, it is actively exploited. When you do not understand the limits of institutional power, whether that is the power of the state, of an employer, of a creditor, of a landlord, of any authority that touches your daily life, you automatically surrender control. You accept conditions you had the right to refuse. You comply with demands that had no legal basis. You stay silent in situations where speaking had the power to change everything. Not because you chose to surrender, but because you did not know there was a choice. Think about what that means in practice. Every interaction you have with a system you do not understand is an interaction in which you are operating at a fundamental disadvantage. The other side knows the rules. You do not. And in any negotiation, in any dispute, in any moment where power is being exercised over you, the person who understands the rules wins. Not always through malice, simply because knowledge is leverage. And leverage, in the absence of counterbalance, becomes control. Francis Bacon wrote in 1597 that knowledge is power. What he understood, and what is still true 4 centuries later, is that the inverse is equally real. Ignorance is weakness. And in a system built on rules, procedures, and legal frameworks that most people never study and few ever fully understand, that weakness is not randomly distributed. It falls most heavily on those who can least afford it. And here is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The system, as it functions, does not require you to know your rights in order to operate. Courts process cases, contracts are signed, regulations are enforced, institutions make decisions that affect your life. None of this pauses to verify that you understood what you agreed to, what you were entitled to refuse, or what protections existed that nobody mentioned.
The machinery moves forward regardless. And the people inside it, the lawyers, the administrators, the officials who do understand the rules, operate in an environment where your ignorance is simply a given, a permanent structural advantage for whoever is on the other side of the table. You do not need to prohibit someone from having rights. You only need to ensure they never learn how to exercise them. The practical outcome is identical, and this version is far easier to maintain because it requires no visible act of oppression. There is nothing to protest, nothing to point to, nothing that can be clearly named as the source of the injustice. There is only a population navigating systems it does not understand, making decisions it does not realize it has the right to make differently, conceding ground it never knew it was entitled to hold. That is the architecture of invisible control, and it does not require a conspiracy to function. It only requires that education about rights remains inaccessible, that legal language remains impenetrable, and that the gap between having rights and knowing how to use them remains as wide as possible for as long as possible.
And here is the discovery that changes everything, or should. Your ignorance is not simply a personal gap in your education. It is a structural pillar, a load-bearing wall in a system of control that functions precisely because most people do not understand it. The move being played against you is not complicated. It does not require malevolence or coordination. It requires only that you remain uninformed about what you can demand, what is yours by right, and what the limits of power over you actually are. Because when you do not know what you can require, when you cannot distinguish between what authority is legitimately asking of you and what it has no right to ask, you become easy to direct, easy to overreach against, easy to keep in a position of permanent disadvantage that feels like the natural order of things because you have never seen it from the outside. The difference between having rights and knowing how to exercise them is the difference between freedom and vulnerability, between being a citizen and being a subject, between participating in a system and being processed by one. And the question Logos and Law keeps returning to is this: what are you going to do with that information? Because knowing that ignorance is a mechanism of control is itself a form of power. It is the beginning of the only kind of resistance that actually works. Not protest, not outrage, but understanding. Knowing the rules, learning the boundaries, refusing to be the person in the room who does not know what they are entitled to. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt powerless in a situation simply because you did not know your rights? Has there been a moment where understanding the rules earlier would have changed everything? Leave it in the comments, because every story shared here is a reminder that this is not an abstract philosophical problem. It is a daily reality for millions of people who are navigating systems they were never taught to understand. If you do not want to keep being a piece in a game you never agreed to play, subscribe to the channel, because the only way out of this prison is through the door that knowledge opens. This is Logos and Law. See you in the next one. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt powerless in a situation simply because you did not know your rights? Has there been a moment where understanding the rules earlier would have changed everything? Leave it in the comments, because every story shared here is a reminder that this is not an abstract philosophical problem. It is a daily reality for millions of people who are navigating systems they were never taught to understand. If you do not want to keep being a piece in a game you never agreed to play, subscribe to the channel, because the only way out of this prison is through the door that knowledge opens. This is Logos and Law. See you in the next one.